I'm not a great fan of TikTok. I've never really understood how to use it. And Instagram, I don't really understand Instagram either. I don't think these things are particularly for me. I ought to make more of an effort. I ought to learn. I will try. But every so often something pops up and you just think, wow, this is such a wonderful treat. And there was a thing which popped up a few minutes ago of Mrs. Thatcher being interviewed by Terry Wogan. It was one of those rare moments when television met tectonic plate, and these two immovable forces, one velvet-voiced, the other iron-willed, each trying to charm, outwit, and survive the other. You could sense that Wogan, for all his Irish geniality, was bracing himself for what the Treasury might call a robust fiscal exchange. He began in the sort of usual way, and I think I sort of remember this happening in the last or the penultimate year of Thatcher's premiership. He was polite, he was teasing, he was disarming. You don't often get an audience as rowdy as that, I suppose, Prime Minister, as the audience cheered and clapped when she came on. Oh, very often at Prime Minister's Questions, she said, that smile, sort of famously immovable smile. They're much rowdier than that at Prime Minister's Questions, and probably not as well disposed. And there was laughter. You could almost hear the clatter of sabres beneath the surface. And then came the question about whether she was ever nervous. And here Thatcher revealed something rather human. Always, she said, and you wouldn't speak well if you weren't. It's a wonderful line because it shows how much she thrived on tension and how nerves work so much for the performer. Most people, before PMQs, have butterflies. She says she prepared intensely 4 hours, and yet she insisted that preparation was everything. 4 hours before each session, combing through papers, anticipating questions, calculating answers like a human treasury spreadsheet. One imagines the civil servants tiptoeing around her, whispering about gilt yields while she sharpened her verbal bayonet. And she told Wogan almost wistfully that once she began to speak, you forget about yourself completely. You think only about the answers. And there, in that moment, the Iron Lady disappeared. The logician, the debater, the chemist, the scientist, the economist took over. You could sense that shift from personality to purpose. And then came the bit about television, which she clearly found intolerable. I can't bear seeing myself, she said. I think one would be most critical, far more critical than anyone else. And it's rather touching that a woman capable of staring down the IRA, of staring down Arthur Scargill and Ronald Reagan, still couldn't face her own reflection on News at 10. And she would, if the family were watching the news and she came on, she would go in and switch the television off. But the real gem of the interview is the line that encapsulated her entire philosophy of government and life. When asked about decision-making, about the intensity of argument in Downing Street, she replied with that clipped, unarguable certainty, there are arguments, of course there are. I have a dominating personality, and so do others. And they don't make concessions because I'm a woman. In the end, we come to the right conclusion. Wogan had asked her, do people make allowances for the fact that you're a woman? She says, why should they? I don't make allowances for the fact that they are men. And she got this roar of applause from the audience. Pure Thatcher, commanding, unbothered, slightly terrifying in its assurance. You can practically hear Wogan's eyebrows rising. Imagine being in that cabinet meeting. Papers flying, Nigel Lawson muttering about the money supply, Geoffrey Howe politely sharpening his resignation letter, and Thatcher booming, no, 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 across the room. Yet, by her account, these weren't battles, they were simply the natural byproducts of converging greatness. And that's the joy of the Wogan interview. He drew from her both warmth and steel. Quite an astonishing trick. A sense of nervous humanity mixed with imperial confidence. It's like watching the Queen of Chess explaining stage fright while checkmating you in 3 moves. By the end, Wogan's grin had faded slightly, perhaps from exhaustion. He'd survived something between a sermon, a seminar, and a surgical strike, and Thatcher, serene as ever, had delivered the ultimate moral of her public life: preparation, conviction, domination, and of course, in the end, we come to the right conclusion. Now, you suspect even Wogan, the most amiable man in broadcasting, left that studio thinking, next time I'm interviewing a kitten.